Exodus part 12, and we're gonna be drawing from Exodus 20. Remember last week that God spoke these words, these 10 words to the people. It's called the law of God, and the rest of it, which is not any less important, but it's called the law of Moses. That means Moses got it from God. Moses was the mediator. So I want to go back to verse 1. And God spake all these words, saying, I am the Lord thy God, which have brought thee out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Well, verses 1 and 2, he reminds them that he's the one that brought them out of bondage, brought them out of the land of Egypt, out of the house of bondage. The 10 commandments, or the 10 words, is God's love expressed to us. You know, we've talked about this before, so if I act outside of these words, then I'm outside of love. I'm not in love. Nor am I acting out of love or unto love. This, you know, like a river. If a river doesn't have a river bank, it's a swamp. You know what I mean? So a river flows by the banks. Well, here is the channel, the bed river, the rock bed river of love, and it's expressed in 10 words. And Jesus said it, and Paul would say it, that the whole law is summed up in love. So when I keep the law, I'm loving. When I'm not keeping the law, I'm not loving. Now maybe this will answer itself in the end, but it's one of those things in the church that we throw the law out. We got many books here on the law, so we can't throw the law out. So we got to look at it. We got to see. God He was very specific when He gave this to Moses, when He spoke to the people, to make sure it was recorded, make sure it was kept. Not just so I could throw it out. Jesus didn't come to cross the law out. He came to fulfill the law. And He even went into great details of the law on the Sermon on the Mount. You want to know what the Sermon on the Mount is? It's the 10 Commandments in action, in greater expression. And Paul didn't throw the law out. Paul even said in Romans, the law is holy, it's just, it's good. And in the epistles, you have all the commandments in there except one. And we'll get to that one later, but all 9 are there. Only one's missing. So a Christian can't say, I'm above the law. A whole lot of Christians think that, like we talk about, well, I'm not under the law anymore, I'm under grace, I can do whatever I want. The very thing that Paul said, should we sin more that grace may abound? God forbid. You have no idea what you're talking about, is what he said. You have no clue. In fact, the heart of the new covenant, and the covenant of the Spirit, He writes the law in our hearts and in our minds. He doesn't write something different. He writes this law in our heart and in our minds. So that the Christian is more bound by the law than any other person. We're more bound by the law than any other person. So we look at this law. It's the expression of God's holiness. What I mean by that, because James would bring it down, and holiness, whole, one. We get 10 different expressions, but Jesus summed it all up in love, one word, love. So it's really not 10 separate laws. It's one. That's why James would say, if you break one, you broke them all. So I can't come across and say, well, you know, number 3 sounds like a pretty good one. I can do that one. I don't like 4 and 5. You break one, you break them all. Because all are the expression of the holiness of God. All express the love of God. Now, the Pharisees, they didn't see that. Most people today don't see it. They made a code out of it. What they do is try to figure out a way to not break it. You remember the difference? Jesus fulfilled the law. People today try to figure out how not to break the law. There's a huge difference. So they would come up with, oh, I can take 3,000 steps on this day. I can't take 3,001. So if I just take 3,000 steps, then I've not broken the law. To me, it's almost like a bunch of kids. They see the boundaries, but instead of staying well inside the boundaries, they go right to the edge and see how much they can push the boundaries. Today, it's preached that way in the churches. Do this, don't do that. And it you know, it's dead letter, and it kills you. It's what it's supposed to do. They made a code out of it. They codified. The actual keeping of the law is actually commitment to the person who the law expresses. And you know, we talked a little bit about this last week. We got the first 4, then number 5, and then the last 4. Or the last 5. It's man in relation to God. And number 5, we got family. And then man's relation to man. So we got man to God, man to man, and the family unit. That's the summation of the laws. And here back in Exodus 20, God is introducing himself to them by reminding them where they came from. You know what he's telling them here? I loved you and brought you out of bondage. See, we never read these old scriptures. We get this view of God and we read the old scripture. God up there. And he's reminding them, I brought you out. I loved you and I brought you out. I brought you out of bondage. And when I say this, people are going to say no, but really deep down, this is what we believe. Most believe God is an evil ogre. He loves misery. He loves pain. I mean, when people come to church, what do they think? Well, I know God's going to want me to go do something I don't want to do. He's going to want me to be miserable. He's going to want me to make a fool out of myself. You know, I mean, and that's the mindset, because God is into misery. He's into embarrassment. He's into all these things. That's the view that we have. That view come out of the garden where we run away from God. I mean, we can't believe that God is happy. We can't believe that God is full of joy. We cannot believe that God's intention for you is joy. God's whole desire is for you to have joy. I mean, that never occurred to us. So God here in Exodus 20 is speaking to them in a language that they can understand. Breaking it down to them right here. I'm going to come to you. I'm going to humble myself. Talk to you. Words that you can hear. He spoke to them in their own language. Now back in Egypt, you know how many God spoke in Egypt? 0. Because they was carved out of sticks and stones, and they couldn't talk. But yet they all worship. So these people have been down there 430 years. All their generations brought up under all these idols. But now here, they're hearing a God who speaks. I mean, here we got God, I mean, this is the essence of relationship, is being able to speak back and forth one to another. So God introduces himself to them right out of the gate here as one who loves them. I was the one who brought you out of bondage. I mean, he says, I am the Lord thy God. He's just introduced himself to them as the eternal I am, the ground of all existence, the self-sufficient one. And if that's the case, if he's the ground of all existence, the self-sufficient one, any other God before him is an impossibility. And you got to understand this part, and this part hurts a whole lot right here, but God doesn't share rulership. It's not a 50-50 partnership. If so, then he's not sovereign. So the revelation of who God is demands there be no other gods before him. You see? Now this is the thing, guys, and what I'm saying, if you can understand this, you can move this forward into the New Testament and see why Jesus would ask certain questions. Because if there's no other gods, and he's it, then he has a right to ask the disciples, why are you afraid? Because obviously you're afraid of another God. You're afraid of something else here. You see what I mean? Now, how many Christians live a life full of worry and anxiety? Well, why would Paul write, there's Lord's many, there's God's many, but unto us there's just one? So he's introducing himself. He's saying God is not one among many. I know you guys were raised in Egypt where there's a lot of gods, but he's the only one. Thou shalt have no other gods before me. Thou shalt not make unto thee any graven image or likeness or anything that is in heaven above or the earth beneath or that is in the water underneath. Thou shalt not bow thyself to them, nor serve them. For I, the Lord thy God, am a jealous God, visiting the iniquity of the fathers upon the children, and to the third and fourth generation of them that hate me. Now, I'm kind of giving you an overview here. You can go back and look, but remember the words covenant and love and hate, and how we looked at those things. And hate was, it was a word to describe people out of covenant. So he's talking about idols right here. And Lord, I've heard so many things about idols. But here we've got he's talking about idols, graven images. An idol is another god. We know that. But really and truly, there is no other God. There's only one. So an idol in itself is only an extension of me. It's the extension of myself. Why do you think we got so many denominations? I think God's like this. Well, I think he's like that. Is that what we do? We make God in our own image and after our own likeness. Paul says we worship the creature more than the Creator. When man wanted to go to war and kill, he would worship a god called Mars. When man wanted to indulge in immoralities, he would worship Venus. We had a God for it all. We got a God for that. Man began by worshiping one God. All the way back in the garden, there was just one God. There wasn't even a thought of another God. But that became too much for man. Why do I say that? Adam, the old sinner guy here, who would just eat the lie, he didn't want that God around. He didn't feel comfortable around that God anymore. God seemed threatening to him, right? I was afraid. Thought you was going to get me. And then you push me out of the garden. I don't want this God around. He's threatening me. Push me out of the garden. So see, we started out worshiping one God. Couldn't control that God. So now I'm pushed out of the garden. I'm running away, so I created many other gods. I knew there was a God, but that God demanded too much. So I would rather have this nice, neat little God over here, the one I can keep in a box. One, if I'm not going to war, I don't have to worry about Mars, right? If I'm getting ready to go to wars, we'll make a sacrifice and we'll call on him. Other than that, he's over there, he's out of the way. I don't have to deal with him. I got this other God for planting my crops and doing all that. And, it's wintertime, we ain't planting crops. I don't have to worry about that God, And I can keep him in a little box. I can control him. I got these gods on a chain. I know what makes them tick. I know how to get my crops. And I can handle that. I'm going to tell you this. All the idols and little g gods in the world are not stepping stones in man's ongoing coming to the light. Rather, they're milestones telling you how far away you really are. So idols then are just when men worship the creation instead of the Creator. Last week we talked about it in Habakkuk about those fish nets. They worshiped the nets more than they did the bounty that they had. And we could sum it all up in today's society is this. What makes today's society click? I mean, it's materialism. Gotta have it. Gotta have it. So what is materialism? Worshiping the Creator. Or creation. Yeah, I said it backwards. Worshiping the creation. I'm just kind of giving you an overview here. Verse number 7, thou shalt not take the name of the Lord thy God in vain, for the Lord will not hold him guiltless that taketh his name in vain. So we're talking about taking the name in vain to blaspheme. I wish we had a lot of time we could go in that word. We have a little bit, but to the Hebrew culture, to blaspheme is to treat a person with indifference or carelessly. It would mean a person who speaks carelessly or lightly of God. You remember the Hebrews? They wouldn't even say the word. They don't want to be found guilty of this, so they wouldn't even say the word. So it's a person who just speaks lightly, has no reverence. Remember how we started off last week about the thunders and the lightnings and the awesomeness of God? But yet, me and Jesus got our own thing going. You see what I mean? Yes, he's friends, but he's still God. You can't take away the awesomeness of it. We could say to live carelessly in the light of the God we know is to be taking his name in vain. There's no awesomeness there. One of the words in the New Scriptures, or in the New Testament, it's in the Old too, but it's to fear. To fear and trembling. It's not being scared of God as a bully, but it's a fear as in reverence. It's a fear as in awe. So we could say to live lower than what we know and to live and to live there deliberately is to take his name in vain. To live lower than what we know and to do it deliberately is to take his name in vain. Because, who are we? Who are born-again Christians? We are the body of Jesus Christ. We're the church. We are sons and daughters of the living God. That's who we are. To live like paupers and beggars is to take his name, but that is not who you are. I told you we got a great identity crisis in the church. Now, this word here, to take, in verse 7. Actually, in the Hebrews, it means you shall not pronounce. You shall not pronounce in vain. And the word vain there means deceitful, to act unreal as a thing is not, and to do so with a sinful reason. So what he's saying here, to sum it up, we are not to pronounce the name of the Lord in a way that does not square with reality, and to do so with a sinful intent. What I mean by that, I think of an example. I grew up in this very thing. Every time somebody gets sick, God did it. Every store that God did it. You see what I mean? That's not God. That's not square with reality. So I'm taking the name of the Lord in vain. That's not, you see? And plus I'm doing it deceitfully with a sinful intention, because I mean to prove to you what a terrible person you are and how God has to punish you. That if he's punishing you, I must be so much better because, look, I'm helping. You see what I mean? All the deceitfulness of man. And then, that goes into a whole lot of things. It goes in there with that magic stuff. Look, trying to get God to, we think, if I'm right, then this will happen, or if you're wrong, that happened to you. You know what I mean? Verse 8, the Sabbath. Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. I want to read verse 9. 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. I bet people didn't know verse 9 was in the Bible, because all I have here is verse 8. Remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. Now, if true Christian people wanted to really keep the Sabbath is on a Saturday. I don't know if most people know that. But the Jewish Sabbath is Saturday. Really, this command here is 2 in 1. He says, remember the Sabbath to keep it holy. Verse 9, 6 days shalt thou labor and do all thy work. So it's work and rest. See, a man that's got no job has got a job, and his full-time job is to find a job. Why is that? I mean, kids ask, why should they work? They should work because they're made in the image of God. And God worked 6 days and rested on the 7th. So even if you become a multi-gazillionaire, you still should work. You should do something. I mean, that's just the way it is. So we work 6 days, and on the 7th day, with a great sense of accomplishment, then we worship. I mean, monkeys don't work. They just live out in the woods. You ever see a monkey build a house? Monkeys don't build roads. Rabbits ain't coming up with a new way to build a burrow out there. They've been digging hole. Groundhogs been digging a hole in the ground for thousands of years. They ain't changed a bit. They ain't laid no carpet down. They ain't, worked on indoor plumbing. Nothing. And there's a verse in 2 Thessalonians, I believe it's chapter 3, verse 10, says, if you don't work, you don't eat. And you see, this goes back, to not knowing who we are. Now see, in in the Thessalonian church, I'll say it that way, what happened was, and we'll go into this some more later, they thought it was the end of time. They thought, hey, it's getting ready to happen. No need for us to work anymore. You see what I mean? That's why Paul had to go down there and straighten them out, because they thought, hey, it's just a matter of weeks here. There's no reason to pay our bills anymore. No reason to work. Paul had to go straighten them out. And he kind of got rough with them. Said, if you don't work, you don't eat. Because these guys were down there sponging. Christians was sponging off the rest of them. I would have liked to see these spongers come into Paul's church. You know how you get these visitors come around the church and bum money? Paul would put them right to work. But they didn't come back. But it says that God, you know, he labored 6 days and he rested. That doesn't mean God was tired. It's not a negative that he was wore out. And it's a word of positive, and it's a word of that peace and joy that the work has been accomplished and brings in satisfaction, brings in joy. Does that make any sense? So he's resting because of what he's accomplished. And it sets us up in a cycle of 7. Work 6 days, 7. So man works towards rest. So see, there was a goal there. Man's not just living aimlessly. There was a goal. Man is moving toward a certain end, and that end was Sabbath. And I had that book from Abraham Joshua Heschel on the Sabbath, which really goes into a lot of detail. But the Sabbath every Sabbath was a celebration of man's eternity. It was a celebration of the eternity. And what is that? You know, eternal life. Why did Jesus come? I come that you might have life. He said, this is eternal life, that you might know him and him whom he has sent. So Jesus was crucified, well, just by our natural calendar, he was crucified on the eve of the Sabbath. He was crucified on Friday. So the Sabbath would have started at 6 p.m. on Friday, because in the evening and in the morning were the first day. So at Friday evening at 6 p.m., the Sabbath would have went on all the way until 6 p.m. of Saturday evening. So Jesus is buried in the tomb on the Sabbath. He lays in the tomb all day on the Sabbath. He rested. He was in rest. Remember, he's worked. What did Jesus say? I finished. It's finished. Now it goes into rest. So we see a picture of the cross all the way back in creation, if you can see it. But on the first day of the week, Jesus rose again and brought in a new creation. He is the new creation. And so he brought in the new creation on Sunday. That's why we meet out on Sundays. It's not that we put more importance on a Sunday than a Saturday, but if we're going to meet out, we understand the relevance of it. So the old creation came to its finale on Saturday, on the Sabbath. The new creation in the Holy Spirit came to its finale on the first day of the week. Remember, Jesus would say, in that day you'll know. In that day you'll know. He was speaking of another day. This day was going to be gone and a new day ushered in. So you and I no longer keep the Sabbath. That's the only command that's not repeated in the epistles, is to keep the Sabbath. Hebrews 4 will tell you there is a rest given of labor, therefore, to enter into that rest, the rest that's given of God. He said if there was another day, he would have told you, but there's not another day. This is that day, the day of the Lord. So all the other commandments we keep, but we rest in Jesus. Does that make any sense? And we know the Sabbath was a feast, and there was all kinds of feasts. There were 7 feasts. And we talked about Passover a little bit. That was about a year ago. We talked about Passover, but there was Feast of Passover and unleavened bread, and the wave offering, and Pentecost, and Sabbath and tabernacles and, lots of feasts here. But this is a feast that came every week. And it was set apart to God like all the feasts were set apart to God. But all those feasts find their finality in Jesus. They find their fulfillment in Jesus. We're not waiting on another feast. A lot of the church will have Passover's done, Pentecost is done, waiting on tabernacles. No, Jesus is the fulfillment of all of that. He's it. And He lives in you, and you live in Him. I want to do a series one time on those feasts, but we'll get there. I'm going to skip down to verse 12 because those other verses just go in there talking about the Sabbath. Verse number 12, honor thy father and thy mother, that the days may be long upon the land which the Lord thy God giveth thee. So here we got honor. And this honor includes obedience. And it also gives recognition of authority. It means to hold in high esteem. And it goes beyond childhood. It's a position of honor. And why is that? Because what God is to the adult, people today, they have no direction. They have no understanding. Well, what God is to an adult, to you and me, the adult is to the child. Now you go and read the epistles that Paul would write, and he would tell you about disciplining the child, but then he would also say, you could grieve the child. I don't know if that's a word, but provoking. You can provoke the child, so don't do that. So there are certain boundaries, but hey, discipline is in there. If God is my lawgiver, then I'm the lawgiver to my children. You cannot expect a child just to wake up one morning and know everything. If you ain't teaching them, you ain't loving them. So you see what I mean? God's teaching me, I'm teaching them. God is my lover. So what do? I love my children. God is my provider. So what do? I provide for my children. Paul would say, you're an infidel if you don't provide for your children. He says, my Lord, the children don't lay up for the parents, but the parents lay up for the children. That's just natural, isn't it? Not in today's society. So if God's my provider, I make provision for my children. If God controls my life, people ain't going to like this one. Then what happens with my children? I'm under control. I'm under obedience of the Father. So therefore, my children must be under control of me. And you'll see this. Paul, when he's giving out the offices in a church, says if a man's going to be a bishop or an elder or a deacon, he must be under this subjection of this law. He must have his children under obedience. Now see, we just want to throw the whole law out, but brothers and sisters, we can't. You see what I mean? So if I'm under the control of the Holy Spirit, until my children grow up and become under the control of the Holy Spirit, they're in subjection to me. That's just the way it is. That's the nature of things. So if you don't discipline your child, they'll have a great problem accepting the discipline of the Lord later on in their life. Because there is discipline of the Lord. And if they've never known any discipline, and really, to those, that listen to these videos, if you haven't disciplined your child, you're letting a maniac loose on society, and it's your fault. You're responsible. It says that foolishness is bound up in the heart of a child. And there was a way to get that foolishness out. Gage back here saying, a rod of correction. I've had a few rods of correction, but I'm telling you, it's the truth.
Nobody does that anymore.
Well, that's the lost cause on society.
Mhm.
But, I mean, it is there. There has to be, because, you know, I'll just give you an example. Growing up, lived in an old farmhouse, and steps going upstairs. Well, today a landing on a step has to be a certain width. Well, in the farmhouse, it didn't have to be that. It was just thrown together. So it's this landing might be wider than this landing. And there's no handrails. And these old wooden steps kind of tough. Well, I fell down them steps many times. When you're a young person, you fall down, you just get back up. But you can fall on the side, it's a pretty good ways down. You're just sitting on hard floor. And then we had the habit of playing on the steps, piling stuff up on the steps. Well, I can remember Dad said, you know, because the last time I fell down the steps, could have broke something, could have hurt myself. He said, next time you run down them steps, or if you put anything on them steps, you're going to get a whipping. It wasn't 5 minutes later. I forgot my baseball glove. Run up the steps to get it, and run down the steps. Well, I got a whipping. But you see, that law was given and discipline was there. Why? Because outside of that, I was in danger. I was endangering myself, so the discipline had to come in to keep me in the bounds of that. Still yet, you know, 45 years later, I remember that, and every time I walk on a set of stairs, I think, don't run. You see what I mean? Because not of being mean, but you get outside of that boundaries and it's death. It can cause you great harm. So that law was put there as a boundary of love. Now this honor that we give to our parents, it says, honor thy mother and thy father. And it means that this honor continues all through life. I bet you guys didn't know this, but in all the other nations around at that time, and the Eskimos, what I hear still yet today, and including Egypt at this time, animals do this too. When people got old, the children would kill them. They had their method of getting rid of them. Because now they're old, they're just taking up space, they're no more use. So we get rid of them. Send them out. You know, animals will do that. You know, dogs and you know, once they get old and a little bit sickly, I had chickens, and once an old chicken gets old, the others just peck him to death. They'll get rid of him. He's just taking up space. I mean, this had to be something, because God is saying this is not the way we are. The Eskimos, when somebody gets old, will just send them out on the ice. They either die on the ice or polar bear eats them. You know, you're out of here. You've probably seen these old movies when the old was on his walk. They're sending him out. He's done. You've been taking up too much space. You know, we need this for the young, for the strong. You're out of here. Honor thy father, thy mother. Goes all the way. There wasn't no until they get old. This went all the way. Because when God said this, it was the way it was to the other nations. So what do we do today? Today we don't put them out on the ice, let the polar bears get them. We put them in the heritage home. Put them in an old folks home. I'm telling you what, the generation today is pitiful. No other nations around the world have old folks home. Do you know in the Philippines, in Singapore, you work till you're 50 years old and you retire. And then you know what happens when you retire? You go to live with your parents. Or your parents come to live with you. And they're there. There is no such thing as an old folks home. But everybody, well, we can't care for them. Baloney. You know what I mean? But I mean, that's what we do. It's big business. So our nation in itself has just become this, we don't care about you old people. Y'all are done. We're sending y'all away. Y'all are taking up space. You know. And what's the price? I mean, you go to old folks' home, the old folks' home says, well, you can come here, but I'm getting your house. And then that just makes the kids mad, because the kids was wanting that house. They was wanting that inheritance. Goes back to the prodigal, you know, I just want my inheritance now, you know, if you just, I mean, that's the way it is, guys. I mean, that is just the way it is. God says honor father and mother. I'll tell you this, you probably didn't know. In ancient culture, the father ruled the roost. When he died, the eldest son took over. Right? At that juncture, in all other cultures, the mother became the property of the eldest son. He could do whatever he wanted to do. Send her out, sell her off, didn't matter. She's just now property. God says, guys, we're not that way. Your mom don't ever become your property if your daddy dies. You still may be the eldest son, but you will always honor your mother. You see what I mean? So see, guys, when I'm talking about this law, you see what I'm talking about? We as Christians are more bound under the law than ever before. So it's not, I'm not under the law anymore. Mom and Dad, y'all are gone. I want the house. Putting y'all in a home. Declaring y'all insane. Christian can't do that. Why? Because, I mean, there's a law in me that says you honor father and mother until they're dead. You still esteem them. They still have to get up and whip your butt right up out of the grave, old gay. Keep acting up.
I need it sometimes.
But you know, so this is a command of the family takes the covenant people and places them separate from all the other nations around. And in verse 13, thou shalt not kill. That's, you know, murder, kill. Back in those days, life was cheap. It's still cheap today. Go to Chicago, see how many people got killed today. It's cheap. Drive by and just shoot. Kill people. Who cares? It's cheap. But God comes with not only a revelation of who God is, but He comes with a revelation of who man is. Man made in the image of God. I despise the fact that nations think they're better than others just because we're such and such an ethnic group. We're better. Jesus gets to the heart of it in the Sermon on the Mount. He says murder can begin in the heart. That's where it begins. It begins with resentment, bitterness, hatred, greed. It begins in the heart. You say, I haven't killed anybody, but you hated your brother. Where did the murder begin? It began because of a hatred in there, bitterness and envy. Resentment. Now I'm thinking of people here, but go beyond people. I don't know if you guys ever been to Gary, Indiana. It's a ghost town. A shell of what it used to be. How about Ammonite? You guys ever been to Ammonite? Coal camp over there. Greedy coal barons go in, greedy steel makers go into a town and rape the land and rape the people for everything they got and then leave. You've got a monument, a hideous monument to the greed of man. Greed came in and murdered those towns. Greed comes in and murders countries. Murders them and just leaves them right there. So, anger, that's just murder in embryo. When you envy someone, when you envy somebody, you really desire their removal. Especially if they do something better than you. You envy them. What you're really doing when you envy them, you really wish they would die so you could get all the glory. I could do that as good as him. I could do that better than him. So envy, again, that's murder in embryo. It's a matter But Jesus would tell us all this is a matter of the Spirit, right? I mean, that's what Jesus is saying. You guys think you've been keeping the law, but I'm telling you this law is way down deeper than what you think. It's a spirit matter. Verse 14, thou shalt not commit adultery. The surrounding nations encouraged, if you will, sexual looseness as part of their worship. That's what they gathered out to do. So this word of God this word is really protecting the marriage relationship. That's what he's doing here. He's protecting the marriage relationship. So when we as Christians are, I mean, can y'all think any of these laws that we're not bound by anymore? Well, I'm not under the law. That means I can cheat on my wife. Try it. I hope she shoots you. You know what I mean? I mean, it's almost ludicrous here. We'll get there in just a second. But this protects the marriage relationship. And the marriage relationship, guys, this is why anything outside of that's an abomination. The marriage relationship on the earth between husband and wife is the sacred picture of the relationship between God and His people. I mean, that's the picture. That's the picture that God has put in every culture in the world. Because every culture in the world has some sort of marriage ceremony. Verse 15, thou shalt not steal. That protects the rights of property. If man's life is sacred, then also his possessions now take on a sacred character. And if you steal, that means you're in violation of the working laws back there under the Sabbath. Thou shalt work 6 days. You're trying to usurp that and steal it off somebody else. You see what I mean? So in stealing, I'm seek to having without laboring for it. And boy, don't we have a whole generation of people now who wants everything without working for it. We got all these people on checks. I just want a check because I don't want to have to work for it. So this law here also speaks to gambling. Why? What does gambling seek to do? I want it without having to work for it. We stretch that ticket off, hit the big money, I can buy a car, I won't have to work. I'll just have a new car without having to work for it. Verse 16, thou shalt not bear false witness against thy neighbor. Protects man's reputation. And you know, you can slander a man without having to say a word. Just the way you talk, maybe a little wink and nod, you know. Tell lies to butter people up. And really, if we see it, you know, God of one blood made all nations, we're really one family. We're one family. Don't care what color you are. If you live in Japan or North Korea or Virginia or Canada or Mexico, we're one. All made in the image of God. So if I'm lying to you, I'm really lying to me because we're one. You see what I'm saying? And then that brings us to verse 17. Thou shalt not covet. It goes on to say thy neighbor's house and neighbor's wife, manservant, maidservant, ox, all those things. But what that really means is you mustn't even want to break all the other 9. Can't even want to. That's why Paul says in Romans 7, let me go over there. Romans 7, see how he words that. Romans 7. I believe it's Romans 7. Oh, yeah. But sin, I'm in verse 8, taking occasion. Well, here it is, verse 7. What shall we say then? Is the law sin? God forbid. Nay, I had not known sin but by the law, for had I not known lust, except the law said, thou shalt not covet. Now, Paul said, look how he says that. For I had not known lust, except the law said, thou shalt not covet. And then he says, but sin, taking occasion by the commandment, wrought in me all manner of concupiscence, for without the law sin was dead. For I was alive without the law once, but when the commandment came, sin revived, and I died. Sounds like a bird up in there, don't it?
Sounds like something bigger than that.
Something big. So he says, the law came and slew me. I'm slain. So he's talking about it's a spiritual matter here. Paul said, I thought I was doing good. Remember, touching the law, Pharisees touching the law, I was blameless. I kept all these things. But this other little law, it came in there. And when it got in there and I really saw it, it slew me. It wiped me out. You remember the story of the rich young ruler? Jesus said, you got to keep all the law. The guy jumped up and down and said, man, I've done that. I've kept that since for you. I did it. Jesus only gave him 9. If you'll go through there, he only gave him 9 because he didn't want to lead the guy into line. Okay? But what Jesus is really saying, okay, I haven't really mentioned coveting, but go and sell all you have, give it to the poor. Because this guy had been holding his knuckles around everything he could get his hands on. You see what I mean? So here we are constantly reading about the law. So what's the problem with the law? I mean, the scripture says we're not under law but grace. So we got to answer this. I mean, these things I read, you know, we're still bound by them. So what do we do? Do we throw the law out? A lot of the church wants to throw the law out. What do we do? I mean, does it mean I have to throw the whole thing out? No. What it really means is we're living the law as never before. Our problem is we've always looked to the law. We've been taught the law, codified, and as a ladder to God. Do you know how many people I hear tell me they'll get a bigger house in heaven because they have done more than what you have? Right? And I hear some people they're scratching and inking away in, and they'll be satisfied with just a little log cabin. So what am I doing? I kept more law, I get a bigger house. I kept less laws, I get a smaller house. It's this ladder, and that's the very thing that kills. And it's supposed to. It's supposed to. Because when it does fail in that way, it's because we missed the point. In Romans 7:7, and verse 13. Well, let me just read verse 13 in Romans. Was then that which is good made death unto me? The law which was good and holy and just was given to me. God spoke it, and it was given to me, but it was made death to me. God forbid, but sin, that it might appear sin, working death in me by that which is good. It worked death in me by the law, because the law was good. That sin by the commandment might become exceeding sinful. So the law was given in order to reveal my guilt. To reveal to me who I am not. Because the lie said you're God. The law says, oh yeah? Right? I mean, you see what I'm saying. So the lie says you're God, you can do it, you're holy, you're just, try hard. The law says, here you go. And God doesn't just say that. He comes to us with 10 blazing words, 10 blazing commandments, 10 rays of light, that it's not just good enough for me to say I'm a sinner. He tells me where I sinned, how I sinned, who I sinned against. You with me? So I just can't jump up and say, well, I'm just... He says, well, now let's get down to the specifics. And I've got 10 of them right here. And you broke every one of them. So I very specifically know my sin. You see what I'm saying? And it also reveals my inability to be independently holy. The law actually makes me a worse sinner than I was before. If I use the law the wrong way, it makes me worse. Because the law came that sin may abound. I'll give you a simple example. Maybe this has happened to you. The law says love the neighbor. Love your neighbor as yourself. Oh, that's a good one. That's an easy one, right? I mean, I'm pretty good. I get along with everybody. So I'll go out here and I'll love my neighbor. I'll show that I can do it. I'll show that I can do the law. I can keep the law. Then as I start to get to know my neighbor, I find out what a wretch he really is. Can't believe he's been living there this whole time. And I'm finding out this might be a little bit harder to do than what I thought it was. The more I find out, this person becomes the most unlovable person that I could possibly be. Now, I set out to prove that I could keep the law, but I find rising up inside of me all manner of bitterness towards this person. Everything he does, and when he cuts his grass, he throws it on my side. His dog craps in my yard. You see what I'm saying? Everything he does is ticking me off now. I was going to keep the law. I was going to do good, but now all manner of hatred. See, I set out to keep the law, but the law drawing something up in me, and I'm actually becoming worse and mean and hateful, bitter person because I'm trying to keep the law. I thought I was a good person till I set out to love my neighbor. How many pulpits around today are preaching the law and wondering why the church is in such a terrible shape? So what I do, I decide to fast and pray. Man, I'm going to really get this. And guys, I've done all of these things. I'm going to fast and I'm going to pray and I will love my neighbor. Care how wretched he is. I'm going to keep the law if it kills me. But you know, the more I try, and then I get my Bible and I got to read my Bible, you know. And that thing gets dry as dust. Y'all ever read the Bible as dry as dust? I mean, you just well read a comic book. Or not even read nothing. I mean, it's nothing. So the law then has done its job. It's driven me, pushed me to the point to where I realize I can't do it. So I tell people, if you would be hot or cold, if you want to preach law, brother, preach it. Preach it 100%. Because then it will serve its purpose. Don't mix law and grace, hot and cold. Mixing law and grace, I'll spew you out of my mouth because people said, my God, I've kept 8 of the commandments. I've needed grace for the other 2, and that was good. It's either all grace or all law. And the you cannot do it, and it'll serve its purpose, driving you to Christ. Now you can see that when the law was given, sin abounded. Because it just drew. It's like a bull. You know, I grew up around cows. And sometimes old bull be laying out there in the field. He just laying there, just laying around. Now he's a bull, but he's laying there. But you go pick on that bull, and I'm going to tell you what we will do. We used to take a BB guns, and we'd shoot them bulls with them BB guns. Now that bull would get mad, we'd run you out of that field. Now, did the BB gun make the bull into something it wasn't already? It just brought out of him what was already there. So the law then is just bringing out of you what is already there. You see? So the law of God comes to me and brings out of me what I really am. I mean, you've got to really know how bad a person you were. I mean, you gotta know that. And I'm not talking condemnation, but what did Paul say? I counted it all dung. I'm crucified with Christ. My God, he said there was nothing in me that was worth saving. Nothing. Paul didn't say, well, he crucified a part of me. I had some good traits. He says, man, was what there was no good in me. When I saw the revelation of Christ, there was no good in me. So see, you got this person who thinks they're so good, and especially, those that they're calling, my sinner buddies. See, once you really have a revelation of Christ, you can't go around and call people names anymore, because everything that person is doing, I realize I've thought about doing it, or maybe I've done it before, and I'm in no better shape than they are, so I can't point the finger. I would love to walk around and say, thou sinners, and you bunch of people, and I know, good Lord, if it wasn't for the grace and mercy of God, I wouldn't be here myself. How can I point my... You see, it brings a humility around. You see what I mean? A humility. But you can't use the law. It's not a ladder to God. So what's the law for? The law, Galatians tells us, was a schoolmaster to drive us to Christ. It showed me my sin, and it showed me, oh boy, you need help. And here is the help that you need.
Yes.
Now, I'm going to just skip right on down. Let me go back here to Exodus 20 here. I'm going to give you the last verse. Last verse. Exodus, I was stuck here in Romans. Well, it's not the last verse. Verse 24. An altar of earth thou shalt make unto me. Now, I'm just going to mention that altar of earth. An altar is mentioned here. Now, we know the altar comes in later on the building of the tabernacle. But as soon as God gives the 10 commandments, as soon as he gives the 10 blazes of law here, that the law was given, God is showing us that as soon as the law's been given and the law condemns us, here's an altar. And this altar is the way that man can walk with God and be forgiven. You see? See the gloriness? So God is showing who he is, showing who we are, and how that we can walk together. In an altar, we know that altar is Jesus Christ. We know that Jesus is the law. We know that he's the whole thing. So, I wanted to get into a little more details, but we'll kind of finish up with that part of it next week, because there's a lot of conduct laws, a lot of miscellaneous laws, and we'll look at those as we move on through this book. So, I will